I never imagined a dress could turn into my worst nightmare. But that night, as I walked out of the restaurant, still tasting the wine on my lips and hearing my friends' laughter ringing in my ears, an old woman sitting on the sidewalk looked at me with such terrified eyes that my blood ran cold. Her lips trembled, her wrinkled hand stretched out towards me like a claw, and she whispered in a voice that seemed to come straight from hell, "Take that dress off immediately, burn it, and throw it away. That dress killed my daughter." I froze. Mary and Sarah, my friends, stopped beside me, confused. The champagne-coloured gown that Robert, my son, had given me just a week prior shimmered under the streetlights of New York City. It was beautiful, elegant, made of a soft fabric that looked like liquid silk. I had worn it that evening feeling like royalty. And now this woman, this stranger in ragged clothes and a desperate gaze, was telling me it had killed someone. "Mum, I think you're mistaken," I said in a shaky voice, trying to stay calm. But she shook her head violently, her eyes filling with tears. "I am not mistaken. I recognize that dress. My daughter wore it before she died. Please, if you value your life, destroy it right now." Sarah took my arm. "Karen, let's go. She's just a poor woman with mental issues." Mary was already waving down a yellow cab, but I couldn't move. There was something in the old woman's voice, something in the absolute certainty of her words that pierced me like a knife. "How did your daughter die?" I asked, even though a part of me didn't want to know the answer. The woman sobbed. "It started with small marks on her skin. Then came the fever, the pain, the weakness. The doctors couldn't find anything until it was too late. When they finally discovered the poison in the fabric, she was already gone." "This is ridiculous," Mary interjected. "Karen, let's go already." I dropped a handful of dollar bills into the old woman's hand and hurried toward the taxi. But the whole way home, her words echoed in my head like a curse. "Burn it and throw it away. That dress, it killed my daughter." That night I couldn't sleep. I lay looking at the dress hanging in my closet, its fabric glowing softly in the dark. It was absurd, of course. Robert had bought it for me at an exclusive boutique downtown. It had cost more than $800, according to him. It was a birthday gift, a gesture of love from my son. How could it be dangerous? But at 3 o'clock in the morning, when I finally managed to close my eyes, I dreamt of the old woman. In the dream, she stood beside my bed, pointing at the dress with an accusing finger. "It has already begun," she whispered. "It is already inside you." I woke up sweating, my heart pounding in my chest. I got up to get a glass of water, and that's when I noticed it. A small red spot on my forearm. It looked like a rash, nothing serious. Probably an allergy to something I ate at the restaurant. I put a little cream on it and went back to bed. But the next morning, the spots had multiplied. There were 3 on my left arm, 2 on my right, and 1 near my neck. They were small, about the size of a dime, but they itched intensely. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, examining them with growing concern. "Mum, are you okay?" Robert's voice startled me. He had come to visit for breakfast, as he did every Sunday. "Yes, honey. Just a few little spots on my skin. Must be an allergy." He came closer to look at them, frowning. "Did you use any new product? A different lotion?" I shook my head. But then I remembered. The dress. I had worn it all night. The fabric had been in direct contact with my skin for hours. "The dress you gave me," I said slowly. "Where exactly did you say you bought it?" Robert shrugged. "At Maison Elegance, that boutique on Fifth Avenue. Why? Did you buy it new?" "Of course, Mum. What kind of question is that?" His tone was defensive now, confused. I didn't tell him about the old woman. It sounded too crazy. Instead, I made coffee and tried to act normal, although every time I scratched my arm, I saw the worry grow in my son's eyes. Respecting boundaries, especially with family, is essential for healthy relationships. Even when seeking to protect a loved one, knowing when to share your anxieties and when to seek professional help first is a sign of maturity and trust, preventing unnecessary fear and conflict. After Robert left, I locked myself in my room and took the dress out of the closet. I examined it inch by inch under the bright light of my reading lamp. There was nothing strange at first glance. The fabric was soft, immaculate. The tag said, "Made in Italy," in gold letters. It smelled faintly of expensive perfume. But when I put my nose close to the neck seam, I perceived something else. A chemical smell, almost imperceptible. Something that shouldn't be there. A shiver ran down my spine. I folded the dress carefully and put it in a plastic bag, sealing it tightly. Then I called my doctor. "Dr. Smith, I need to see you today. It's urgent." 3 hours later, I was sitting in her office, showing her the spots that now covered my arms, neck, and part of my back. I had counted 17 in total. "Have you been in contact with any new plants? Cleaning chemicals? Changes in your detergent?" she asked as she examined my skin with a magnifying glass. "I only wore a new dress 2 nights ago." She looked up. "Did you bring it with you?" I nodded and took the sealed bag out of my purse. Dr. Smith frowned at my precautions, but took the dress with latex gloves and examined it carefully. "I'm going to send a sample of the fabric to the lab," she finally said. "This could be contact dermatitis, but the speed with which it is spreading worries me. Meanwhile, I'm prescribing an antihistamine and a cortisone cream." "And Karen?" She paused, looking at me seriously. "Don't wear this dress again. Don't even touch it without gloves." I left the office with a growing sense of terror in my chest. The old woman's words came back to me. It started with small marks on her skin. That night, the fever arrived. I woke up drenched in sweat, trembling under 3 blankets that couldn't stop the cold I felt in my bones. The thermometer read 102.2 degrees Fahrenheit. The spots on my skin now burned like hot coals, and when I tried to get out of bed, my legs gave way. I had to crawl to the phone to call Robert. "Mom, I'm on my way right now," he said in an alarmed voice when he heard my ragged breathing. 20 minutes later, I was in the emergency room. Doctors surrounded me, taking blood samples, asking questions I could barely answer between shivers. Robert was by my side, pale, holding my hand so tightly it hurt. "Ms. Parker, we need to know if you've been exposed to any toxic substances recently," asked the attending doctor, a young man with a serious expression. "The dress," I murmured. "I sent a sample to the lab 2 days ago." The doctor nodded and left quickly. Robert looked at me with eyes full of guilt and confusion. "Mom, I don't understand. I just wanted to get you something nice. I swear I bought it at a respectable store." "I know, son. I know." But in the back of my mind, a horrible doubt began to form. What if Robert knew something? What if this wasn't an accident? I shook my head, ashamed of my own thoughts. It was the fever talking. My son would never hurt me. 3 hours later, while they were administering intravenous fluids and antibiotics, Dr. Smith came in with a folder in her hands and a grave expression. "The preliminary lab results came in," she said, looking at Robert and then at me. "Karen, the fabric of your dress contains traces of a highly irritating chemical compound. It's not something that's there by accident. Someone deliberately impregnated it." The world stopped. Robert jumped to his feet. "What? That's impossible. I bought it sealed. in its original packaging. Did you keep the receipt? The doctor asked. Robert searched his wallet with trembling hands and pulled out a folded paper. The doctor examined it and frowned. This says you paid $850 8 days ago. I'm going to need you to contact the store immediately. From my hospital bed, I watched my son dial the boutique's number. His face went from anxiety to absolute confusion. They say they have no record of this sale, he muttered, looking at the receipt as if it were an alien object. The employee says this transaction number doesn't exist in their system. A chill deeper than the fever invaded me. Robert, where did you really buy that dress? I'm telling you, Mum. I went to Maison Elegance. A woman helped me. She showed me several dresses. I chose that one, paid with my card, and left. Describe the woman. He closed his eyes, trying to remember. She was about 40 years old, maybe. Dark hair pulled back in a bun. Very professional. She told me that dress was perfect for you, that it would fit you like a glove. Did she tell you her name? Teresa. Her name was Teresa. The name hung in the air like a bad omen. I didn't know a Teresa, or at least I thought I didn't. Dr. Smith intervened. Karen, I'm going to report this to the authorities. This could be an attempted poisoning. Meanwhile, you need to stay under observation for at least 48 hours. When she left, I looked into Robert's eyes. Son, I need you to be completely honest with me. Is there anyone who would want to hurt me? Anyone you've had problems with? Any woman in your life who might have something against me? Robert turned even paler. Oh, there is someone. But no, she wouldn't be capable of something like this. Who? My assistant at the office. Her name is Teresa. She's been working with me for about 6 months. She's efficient, quiet, has never shown any strange behavior. My heart started beating faster. And she knew about my birthday. Robert swallowed. She was the one who suggested I get you a dress. She said she knew a perfect boutique. She gave me the address. God, I was an idiot. I went straight where she told me. And that boutique was Maison Elegance. The sign outside said that. But now that I think about it, the store was almost empty. There was only that woman helping me. And when I drove by again 2 days ago, the place was closed. I thought maybe it was her day off. The pieces were starting to fit together in a terrifying way. Robert, I need you to investigate everything about this Teresa. Who is she? Where does she come from? Why did she apply for the job with you? And I need you to do it now. He nodded and hurried out of the room. I was left alone, hooked up to IVs and machines, with the spots burning on my skin and a growing terror in my chest. Who was Teresa? Why would she want to hurt me? And how did she know that a poisoned dress would be the perfect weapon? I closed my eyes, trying to remember if I had ever known anyone with that name. But my head was spinning from the fever and the medications. Then I heard the door open. I thought it was a nurse, but when I opened my eyes, I saw a woman in her 40s, standing in the doorway. Dark hair pulled back in a bun. Elegant. Cold. You must be Karen, she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I'm Teresa, your son's assistant. Robert asked me to come and bring you some things you need. She was carrying a bag in her hand. My instinct screamed danger. I don't need anything, I said in a firm voice despite the fear. And I think you should leave. Her smile widened. You know, the dress looked beautiful on you, just as I imagined. Too bad you won't be able to wear it ever again. The blood froze in my veins. It was you. You did this. Teresa approached my bed slowly. Robert is so trusting, so easy to manipulate. When I suggested he get his dear mother an elegant dress, he practically jumped for joy. He never suspected a thing. Why? What did I do to you? Her eyes darkened with an hatred so intense that I shrank back against the pillows. You don't know me, but I know you very well, Ms. Parker. I've been waiting for this moment for 30 years. 30 years? The number resonated in my head like a gong. I looked at Teresa, desperately trying to find something familiar in her face, in her eyes, in the way she looked at me with that ancient hatred. But there was nothing. She was a complete stranger. I don't know what you're talking about, I whispered, reaching with my hand for the call button for the nurses. Teresa noticed and laughed. A bitter laugh, full of pain accumulated over decades. Of course you don't remember me. To you, my mother was invisible. Just another employee. Someone you could discard when it was convenient for you. My mind raced back in time. 30 years ago, I was 41 years old. Robert was just a boy. My husband was still alive. We had had housekeepers. Yes, several over the years. Your mother worked for me, I said slowly, trying to remember. She worked for you for 5 years. She cleaned your house, cooked your meals, took care of your precious son. And when she became pregnant with me, when she needed that job the most, you threw her onto the street like trash. A blurry memory began to form. A young woman with delicate features who one day arrived with a uniform tighter than usual. I had noticed her growing belly. My husband had insisted we fire her. We can't have a pregnant employee, he had said. She won't be able to work properly, she'll be a problem. And I had agreed, without questioning it, without thinking about the consequences for her. My God, I murmured. Your mother. What was her name? Helen. Her name was Helen. And after you fired her, with no references, no compensation, she had to beg to survive. She had me alone, in a homeless women's shelter. We spent years in misery while you lived in your beautiful house with your perfect family. Tears began to stream down my cheeks, not of self-pity, but of horror as I realized what I had done, or rather, what I hadn't done. I hadn't fought for Helen. I hadn't questioned my husband. I had simply let her go. I'm sorry, I said, my voice breaking. I am so sorry, Teresa. But this, poisoning me, won't change the past. No, she replied coldly, but it will give me satisfaction. Do you know how much my mother suffered? How many nights I heard her cry, wondering how to feed me? She developed health problems from the stress, from the bad diet, from working miserable jobs that barely paid for rent. She died 3 years ago, Miss Parker. At 68 years old, exhausted and broken, while you lived comfortably with your late husband's pension. Then the old woman, I whispered, the woman who warned me about the dress. Teresa smiled bitterly. My benefactor, the lady who helped me when I was a child. Her daughter died in similar circumstances. A contaminated dress that caused a fatal allergic reaction. When I told her my plan, she wanted to warn you. She has too kind a heart. But I knew you wouldn't listen to her. And Robert? He's innocent in all this. How could you use him like that? Robert is the son who had everything I never had. A father, a mother, education, opportunities. Getting a job as his assistant was ridiculously easy. I faked references, created an impeccable identity. He trusted me from day one, and when his birthday came, it was so simple to plant the idea of the dress. My breathing sped up. The monitor next to my bed began to beep faster. The fake store, the fake receipt, it was all part of your plan. I rented the space for a week. I put up the Maison Elegance sign. I only needed it to work for one day. The day Robert would go buy his gift. Then everything disappeared, as if it had never existed. And the dress? Where did you get the poisoned dress? Teresa moved even closer, her face inches from mine. I made it myself. I bought a beautiful dress at a thrift store. I got the chemical compound through contacts. It's not illegal if you know where to look. I spent weeks impregnating every fiber of the fabric with the substance. I calculated the perfect dose, enough to make you severely ill, to make you suffer, but not to kill you. At least not immediately. The terror paralyzed me. Not immediately. The effects are cumulative. The longer it was in contact with your skin, the deeper the absorption will be. The fever is just the beginning. Soon will come the joint pain, the difficulty breathing, the kidney failure. Doctors will be able to treat you, of course, but the damage is already done. You will live, Ms. Parker, but you will live in suffering, just as my mother suffered. I wanted to scream, but my throat was tight with fear. I pressed the call button frantically. Teresa saw it and sighed. I guess our time is up, but I needed you to know the truth. I needed you to understand why. My mother died without justice, without you even remembering her name. But I didn't forget her, and I made sure you will never forget me. She turned to leave just as the door burst open. Robert ran in, followed by 2 police officers. "There she is," my son shouted. "That's Teresa." Teresa didn't try to run. She simply stood there, with a disturbing calm as the officers approached. "Teresa Morales," one of them said. "You are under arrest for attempted poisoning and fraud." As they put the handcuffs on her, she looked at me one last time. "My mother's name was Helen Morales. I want you to remember that name every day you have left to live." They took her away. Robert rushed to my bed, taking my hand. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I researched her history. It was all fake. Her references, her resume, everything. I called the police as soon as I discovered she had disappeared from the office this afternoon. I was afraid she would come here." "It's okay, son," I murmured, even though nothing was okay. "It's not your fault." But deep down, I knew it wasn't entirely Teresa's fault either. Yes, what she did was horrible, criminal. But the pain that drove her to do it, that pain was born of my indifference, my silence, my complicity 30 years ago. The nurses came in and Robert had to leave. I was left alone with my thoughts, with the memory of Helen Morales, a woman I barely remembered, but whose life I had destroyed with my passivity. The champagne-coloured dress had been more than a weapon. It had been a message, a reminder that our actions, or our lack of them, have consequences that can haunt us for decades. And while the spots on my skin continued to burn, I wondered if I could ever forgive myself. The next 3 days in the hospital were a torture. Not just because of the physical pain that ran through my body like liquid fire, but because of the weight of the guilt that crushed my chest with every breath. The doctors had managed to stabilize me, but the spots on my skin had spread to cover almost 40% of my body. It seemed as if I was being slowly devoured from the outside in. Robert came every day, with deep bags under his eyes and a tormented expression. He blamed himself, of course. He had brought the poison directly into my hands, wrapped in gift paper with a gold ribbon. "I quit my company," he told me on the 3rd day, sitting by my bed with his head in his hands. "I can't keep working knowing I was so blind, so stupid." "Don't be ridiculous," I replied, though my voice came out weak. "Teresa manipulated you. She was an expert. This is not your fault." But I should have noticed. There were signs, little things I ignored. "What things?" He looked up, his eyes bloodshot. "Sometimes I would find her looking at me in a strange way, like she was studying me, and she asked too many questions about you, about your routine, your tastes, your friends. I thought she was just being nice, trying to help me find the perfect gift. But she was gathering information. A shiver ran through me despite the fever. What else did she ask you? About our family, about Dad, about the past. I told her things, Mum. Personal things, like the fact that you almost never wore fancy dresses, that a dress like that would be something special for you, that you would keep it, that you would value it. His voice broke. I gave her all the tools she needed to hurt you in the worst possible way. I reached out my hand, ignoring the throbbing pain in my skin, and took his. Robert, look at me. Teresa planned this for years, maybe decades. There was nothing you could have done to stop her. But even as I comforted my son, another voice in my head whispered, yes, there was something. You could have been a better person 30 years ago. You could have stood up for Helen. That night, after Robert left, I received an unexpected visit. The old woman from the street, the one who had warned me about the dress, was standing at my room door. She looked smaller under the hospital fluorescent lights, more fragile. A nurse was next to her. She says she needs to speak with you, Ms. Parker. It's okay if she comes in. I nodded, my heart pounding. The old woman approached slowly, leaning on a cane. She sat in the chair next to my bed and looked at me with eyes that no longer held that savage terror, only a deep sadness. I came to apologize, she said in a trembling voice. I should have done more to stop Teresa. I should have gone to the police instead of just warning you. What is your name? I asked gently. Martha. Martha Davis. Martha, you said your daughter died because of a poisoned dress. Was that true? She shook her head, tears rolling down her wrinkled cheeks. No, my daughter died in a car accident 15 years ago, but I knew Helen, Teresa's mother, at the women's shelter. We lived together for a while. I saw how she struggled to survive, how she sacrificed herself for her daughter. When Teresa came to me 6 months ago and told me her plan, I invented that story about the dress to try to save you without betraying Teresa. Why did you help her then, if you knew it was wrong? Martha sighed deeply. Because I understood her pain, because I saw what the injustice did to Helen. But you are right to judge me. I should have been braver. I should have chosen the right thing instead of the easy thing. Her words resonated with me like a mirror. She had failed because of misunderstood loyalty. I had failed because of convenient indifference. We had both allowed the harm to spread. Martha, do you know where Helen is buried? She blinked, surprised by the question. In the municipal cemetery, Section D, grave number 234. She doesn't have a headstone, just a simple plaque with her name. Thank you, I whispered. And Martha, I don't blame you. You did what you could. After she left, I called a nurse and asked for paper and a pen. With trembling hands, I began to write. I needed to document everything, every detail I remembered about Helen Morales. Her face, her working hands, the way she hummed while she cleaned. The small details I had ignored for 5 years. I wrote about the day I noticed her pregnancy, about the conversation with my husband, about the decision to fire her. I wrote about my complicit silence, my lack of empathy, my selfish convenience. It wasn't a legal confession. It was something more personal. A recognition of guilt that I needed to externalize before it consumed me from the inside. Speaking the truth, especially when it implicates you in a mistake, is an act of immense moral courage. It's not about finding immediate forgiveness, but about taking responsibility, which is the only real path to personal healing and integrity. Your honesty can inspire others to face their own difficult truths. On the fourth day, the full lab results arrived. Dr. Smith came in with an expression that mixed relief and worry. "We have good news and bad news," she said, sitting on the edge of my bed. "The good news is that we identified exactly what chemical compound was used. It's a plant-derived irritant substance combined with a skin absorption enhancer. It is not lethal in the doses you received, and with the proper treatment, your body will eliminate it completely. And the bad news: the damage to your skin will be permanent in some areas. The spots will eventually disappear, but you will have scars. And your immune system will be compromised for at least 6 months. You will be more susceptible to infections, allergies. You'll have to be extremely careful." I nodded slowly. It was better than I had feared, but worse than I had hoped. I would live, yes, but I would carry the marks of this forever. "There's something else," the doctor continued. "Detective Johnson wants to speak with you. She's building the case against Teresa Morales. Your testimony will be crucial." The detective arrived that same afternoon. She was a woman in her 50s, with grey hair pulled back in a ponytail and sharp eyes that seemed to see through lies. "Ms. Parker, I need you to tell me everything from the beginning, every detail, no matter how insignificant it seems." I told her everything. Robert's gift, dinner with my friends, Martha's warning, the symptoms, the confrontation with Teresa in the hospital. And finally, with a broken voice, I told her about Helen Morales. The detective took notes meticulously. When I finished, she looked at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. "We knew Teresa has been planning this for at least 2 years," she said. "We found an apartment she rented under a false name. It was full of newspaper clippings about you, photos, documents. She had a calendar marking every step of her plan. The day she applied for the job with Robert. The day she began to gain his trust. The day she planted the idea of the dress. Everything calculated with millimeter precision." I felt nauseous. 2 years. Minimum. Possibly more. "We also found correspondence between her and her mother, letters from 10 years ago, where Helen told Teresa about what had happened to her. About you. Teresa fed that resentment for a decade before finally acting. And now what will happen to her? She will face charges of attempted poisoning, fraud, falsification of documents. We are talking about 15 to 20 years in prison, possibly more. Her lawyer is arguing that she acted under extreme emotional stress, that the circumstances of her childhood led her to this. But the premeditation is too clear. There is no way she will escape this." I remained silent, processing the information. Teresa would spend the next 2 decades in prison. Her life, just like her mother's, destroyed. And all because I hadn't had the courage to do the right thing 30 years ago. "Detective," I finally said, "I want to testify, but I also want the complete truth to be known. Not just what Teresa did to me, but what I did to her mother. I want it on the record." The detective looked at me for a long time. "That could complicate the case. Her lawyer will use it to reduce the sentence." "I don't care. The truth is the truth." She nodded slowly and closed her notebook. "It's your decision, Ms. Parker. I just hope you're prepared for the consequences." I was discharged from the hospital a week later. I left with bags full of medications, strict medical instructions, and a body that no longer felt like mine. The spots had started to fade slightly, but the scars the doctor had mentioned were already visible. Irregular lines of discolored skin that snaked across my arms like maps of my own guilt. Robert insisted that I stay with him during my recovery, but I declined the offer. I needed to be alone. I needed to think. The first thing I did when I got home was go to the closet and take out all my old belongings. Boxes I hadn't opened in years. Yellowed photo albums. old documents. I searched for any evidence of Helen Morales. Pay stubs, references, anything that proved she had existed, that she had worked for me, that she had been a real person with a real life that I had helped destroy. I found three things. A pay stub dated 31 years ago, with her name handwritten. Helen Morales, $200 monthly. A blurry photograph of a Christmas party where she appeared in the background, holding a tray of appetizers. And a letter of recommendation I never got around to writing, just a draft that my husband had forbidden me to complete. "Don't give her references," he had said. "If we're firing her for a reason, we're not going to help her get another job. Be reasonable, Karen." And I had been reasonable. I had put the draft in a drawer and forgotten it. That letter could have gotten her a new job. It could have changed the course of her life. But I chose comfort over compassion. I sat on the floor of my room, surrounded by these relics of my indifference, and cried. Not for myself, not for the poison in my veins or the scars on my skin. I cried for Helen, for Teresa, for all the times I had the opportunity to do the right thing and chose not to. The next day, I took a taxi to the municipal cemetery. The driver looked at me strangely when I gave him the address. Municipal cemeteries are not places where people like me, people with money and connections, usually go. They are for the poor, the forgotten, the ones who die unclaimed. Section D was in the furthest part, where the graves were so close together there was barely room to walk between them. Grave number 234 had no flowers, no recent visitors, only a rusty metal plaque hammered into the earth with her name engraved, Helen Morales, 1957-20-22. I knelt in front of the grave, ignoring the pain that shot through my knees. I had brought flowers, white lilies, the most beautiful I could find. I placed them carefully on the dry earth. "Helen," I whispered, "I don't know if you can hear me. I don't know if it matters after all this time. But I need to tell you I'm sorry. I'm sorry I didn't fight for you. I'm sorry I was so cowardly, so selfish. I let my husband make the decision because it was easier, because your suffering wasn't my problem." The words came out now, a torrent of confession I had been holding in for weeks. Your daughter poisoned me, and part of me understands why. I don't justify what she did, but I understand the pain that led her to do it, a pain that I helped create. The wind blew softly, moving the leaves of the nearby trees. I stayed there for almost an hour, talking to a dead woman who would probably never forgive me. But I wasn't looking for forgiveness. I was looking for something harder. The truth. When I finally stood up to leave, I noticed something. A few feet away, partially hidden behind a tree, was Martha, the old woman who had warned me about the dress. We looked at each other across the distance. She nodded slowly, and then walked away without saying a word. The following days turned into weeks. My body was healing slowly, but my mind was in a constant state of turmoil. I had hired a lawyer, not to defend me, but to ensure that my testimony in Teresa's trial would be complete and honest. I wanted the jury to know exactly what had happened, from the beginning. Ms. Parker, my lawyer, a man named August, with a voice of perpetual concern, told me, "If you testify about your role in Helen Morales's firing, Teresa's lawyer will use that to argue extreme provocation. It could reduce her sentence significantly. Are you sure you want to do this?" "Completely sure." "And do you understand that this could also open the door to a civil lawsuit? Teresa could sue you for the damages her mother suffered." "Let her. She has the right." August looked at me as if I had lost my mind. Perhaps I had, but for the first time in 30 years, I felt like I was doing something right. Robert came to visit me that evening. He had lost weight. with dark circles that wouldn't disappear no matter how much he slept. He sat in my living room, looking at the old photographs I had left on the table. The photo of Helen at the Christmas party. Is that her? He asked in a barely audible voice. Yes. He took the photograph with trembling hands. She looks like Teresa. The same eyes, the same jawline. I know. Mum, I've been thinking about what happened, about what you did, or rather what you didn't do, and I still don't understand it. You were always good to me. You were always there. How could you be so different with her? It was the question that had been tormenting me. Because it was easy, I finally answered. Because she was just an employee, someone whose life didn't really intersect with mine. I didn't see her as a complete person, with dreams and fears and needs. I saw her as part of the furniture. And when she became an inconvenience, I eliminated her. Your father made the suggestion, but I carried it out. I signed her last check. I closed the door when she left. Robert closed his eyes. Did you ever think about her afterwards? About what became of her? No, not once, until Teresa appeared. The silence that followed was dense, suffocating. Finally, Robert spoke again. I've been going to therapy. The therapist says I need to process the guilt, understand that I was a victim of manipulation. But I find it hard to believe. Because if I had been more observant, if I had asked more questions, maybe none of this would have happened. Robert listened to me. Teresa would have found another way. Her plan was too elaborate, too well thought out. If it hadn't been through you, it would have been another way. But she used me. She made me the weapon, and I created the motive 30 years ago. We all played a part in this tragedy. He stood up and walked toward the window, looking at the dark street. What's going to happen now? After the trial? After all this? I don't know, I admitted. But I'm going to testify. I'm going to tell the whole truth. And after I'll have to live with the consequences. What if Teresa goes free? What if the jury decides she was justified? Then I'll have to accept it. Robert turned to look at me, his eyes shining. I don't know if I can be that noble. Mum, part of me still wants her to pay for what she did to you, for using me, for almost killing you. And she will pay, but not in the way you might have expected. Justice is not always simple, son. Sometimes it's complicated and painful and doesn't give anyone what they really want. That night, after Robert left, I took the dress out of the sealed evidence bag the police had returned to me. They would ask me to use it in the trial as evidence, but first I needed to see it one last time. It was beautiful, even now. The champagne colour glowed softly under my lamplight. The fabric was still soft to the touch, despite the poison it contained. Someone had taken great care in choosing it, in preparing it. Teresa had spent weeks impregnating every fibre with distilled hatred. But as I looked at it, I realized something. This dress wasn't just a weapon. It was a mirror. It reflected everything that was broken in this story. External beauty hiding internal poison. The gift that turns into a curse. Love manipulated to cause harm. I folded the dress carefully and put it back in the bag. In 2 weeks, the trial would begin. In 2 weeks, I would have to stand before a court and tell this story from the beginning. And this time, I wouldn't omit anything. The day of the trial arrived with a grey sky that threatened rain. I dressed carefully, choosing a simple suit that wouldn't attract attention. The scars on my arms were still visible, irregular lines that no amount of makeup could completely hide. I decided not to try to hide them. They were part of the truth, and the truth was the only thing that mattered now. Robert accompanied me to the courthouse. He was pale, his hands clenched into fists in his pockets. We hadn't talked much during the drive. What was there to say? We were about to relive the entire nightmare in front of strangers, in front of cameras, in front of the world. The courtroom was packed. I recognized some reporters in the back rows. This case had captured public attention. Woman poisons employer for 30-year vengeance was the kind of headline that sold papers, but none of them knew the complete story. Yet. Teresa was sitting at the defense table, dressed in a conservative grey suit that made her look smaller, more vulnerable. Her lawyer, a man named Henry with silver hair and a calculating expression, was leaning toward her, whispering something in her ear. When our eyes met, I saw something in hers. It wasn't regret, it was determination. The trial began with the usual proceedings. The prosecutor, a woman named Patricia Wells with a firm voice and precise mannerisms, presented the case. Attempted poisoning with premeditation, fraud, falsification of identity. The words sounded clinical, stripped of the raw emotion I had lived. Then it was my turn to testify. I walked to the stand with trembling legs. I swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And when I sat down, looking at the prosecutor and then at the jury, I knew I was about to change everything. "Ms. Parker," Patricia Wells began, "please tell the jury what happened on the night of October the 22nd. I took a deep breath and began. I told them about the restaurant, about my friends, about the dress Robert had given me. I told them about the old woman, about her terrifying warning. I told them about the spots, the fever, the hospital, the diagnosis. And when did you discover that Teresa Morales was responsible? When she came to my hospital room, when she confessed everything. Can you repeat what she told you?" I looked at Teresa. She held my gaze without blinking. "She told me she had planned this for years, that she did it as revenge for what had happened to her mother, Helen Morales." "And who was Helen Morales?" Here it was, the moment of truth. "She was my housekeeper 30 years ago. She worked for me for 5 years, and when she became pregnant with Teresa, I fired her." A murmur ran through the room. Teresa's lawyer straightened in his seat, his eyes shining. The prosecutor frowned slightly but continued. "Why did you fire her?" "Because my husband said a pregnant employee would be a problem, and I accepted his decision without questioning it, without thinking about Helen, about her future, about how she would survive. I just let her go." "Ms. Parker, do you understand that this information could be used by the defense?" "Yes, and I want it to be used, because it is the truth. I cannot stand here and pretend to be an innocent victim when my indifference 30 years ago created this situation." The prosecutor looked at me for a long time. Then she nodded. "No further questions." Teresa's lawyer stood up immediately. Henry walked toward me with measured steps, like a predator approaching its prey. "Ms. Parker, I appreciate your honesty. Allow me to ask you, did you provide Helen Morales with any compensation when you fired her?" "No, only her last paycheck." "References for another job?" "No." "Any kind of help or resources?" "No." "Did you know she was alone? That she didn't have family to support her?" I swallowed. "Yes, she had mentioned it to me." "And you still let her go, knowing she was pregnant and alone, without any kind of safety net?" "Yes." Henry turned to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to imagine what happened next. Helen Morales, a 30-year-old woman, pregnant, unemployed, without references, without money. What options did she have?" "Objection," Patricia said. "Speculation. I withdraw the question. Ms. Parker, did you ever think about Helen after firing her? The truth hurt more than any poison. No, not until Teresa appeared. 30 years. 30 years during which Helen struggled, suffered, worked miserable jobs for minimum wages. 30 years during which she raised a daughter alone in poverty, while you lived comfortably. Does that seem fair to you? No, it is not fair. And do you believe you bear any responsibility for Helen's suffering? Yes, absolutely. The lawyer smiled slightly. He had gotten what he wanted. No further questions. The following testimonies were brutal. Dr. Smith described in detail the poisoning, the effects of the chemical compound, the permanent damage to my skin. Robert testified about how Teresa had manipulated his trust, how she had orchestrated every step of the plan. Detective Johnson presented evidence of Teresa's preparation, the secret apartment, the letters, the calendar marked with every phase of the plan. But then it was the defense's turn to present their case, and they brought witnesses I didn't expect. Martha took the stand first. With a trembling voice, she told about meeting Helen in the shelter, about seeing her desperation, about the nights Helen cried, wondering how she would feed her baby. Helen was a good woman, Martha said with tears in her eyes. Hard-working, honest, kind. She didn't deserve what happened to her, and neither did Teresa. That child grew up watching her mother slowly destroy herself from poverty, from hopelessness. What did you expect to happen? Then came a social worker who had known Teresa as a child. He described a childhood of extreme deprivation, of hunger, of constantly moving from shelter to shelter. He talked about how Teresa had to grow up too fast, taking care of her mother when Helen became ill. Teresa was brilliant, he said. She could have done anything with the right opportunities, but she never had them. All she had was pain and the story of how her mother had been betrayed by people with power. Finally, Teresa herself took the stand. The courtroom fell completely silent. Ms. Morales, her lawyer began, can you explain to the jury why you did what you did? Teresa looked directly at me. Because my mother died without justice. She died believing she was invisible, that her life didn't matter. I wanted Miss Parker to know that actions have consequences, that you can't destroy someone's life and just move on as if nothing happened. Did you plan to kill Miss Parker? No. I wanted her to suffer, yes. I wanted her to feel a fraction of the pain my mother felt for 30 years, but I didn't want to kill her. I calculated the doses carefully to ensure that. Do you regret what you did? Teresa paused for a long time. I regret involving Robert. He had nothing to do with this. It was cruel of me to use him. But as for Ms. Parker, her voice hardened. I can't regret making her feel what it's like when someone with power decides your life is worthless. The prosecutor rose for cross-examination. Ms. Morales, do you understand that what you did is a serious crime? Yes. Do you understand that you could go to prison for 20 years? Yes. And yet you did it. You spent years planning this, knowing the consequences. Yes, because some things are more important than my freedom, like honoring my mother's memory, like making sure her story didn't die with her. Patricia Wells shook her head. But this doesn't honor your mother. This makes you the same as her, someone who uses pain to justify hurting others. Teresa paled. Her hands gripped the edge of the stand. My mother never hurt anyone. Exactly. Your mother was better than this. And I think she would have been devastated to see what her daughter became. It was a brutal blow. Teresa bowed her head, tears rolling down her cheeks. For the first time since the trial began, I saw her not as the cold, calculating woman who had poisoned my dress, but as a broken child who never had a chance to heal. The closing arguments came 3 days later. The courtroom was even more crowded than before. The story had captured the public imagination in a way no one had anticipated. It wasn't just a poisoning case. It was a story about class, justice, revenge, and the invisible consequences of our daily actions. Patricia Wells, the prosecutor, was the first to speak. She stood before the jury with a firm posture and a clear voice. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, during this trial you have heard a tragic story, the story of Helen Morales, a woman who suffered terrible injustices. The story of Teresa Morales, a child who grew up in extreme poverty. And the story of Karen, who admits her role in creating these circumstances. She paused, letting her words resonate. But this case is not about what happened 30 years ago. This case is about what Teresa Morales chose to do in response to that suffering. She decided, with premeditation and malice, to poison a 71-year-old woman. She spent 2 years planning every detail. She falsified documents. She manipulated an innocent son. She created a false identity. She rented an entire commercial space just to perpetuate her deception. She walked slowly in front of the jury, making eye contact with each member. Teresa Morales did not act in a moment of passion. She did not act on impulse. This was a cold, calculated, meticulous plan. She herself admitted it. She knew exactly what she was doing and chose to do it anyway. She pointed to where I was sitting. Karen has permanent scars on her skin. Her immune system is compromised. She will live with the physical consequences of this attack for the rest of her life. And psychologically, both she and her son Robert have been traumatized. Robert was turned into a weapon against his own mother. Can you imagine living with that guilt? Patricia turned toward Teresa. I understand the sympathy you may feel for the defendant. Her story is heartbreaking, but compassion cannot excuse the crime. If we allow past suffering to justify present violence, where do we end up? Does Teresa have the right to poison Karen because her mother suffered? And then Karen or Robert would have the right to take revenge on Teresa? Where does the cycle end? She returned to her table and picked up a folder. The law exists precisely because suffering cannot justify more suffering. Teresa Morales committed a serious crime, and while her story is sad, she must be held responsible for her actions. I ask you to find her guilty of all charges. She sat down. The silence in the room was absolute. Then it was the turn of Henry, the defense lawyer. He stood up slowly, adjusting his tie. When he spoke, his voice was soft, almost conversational. Ladies and gentlemen, the prosecutor is right about one thing. This is not a simple case. But she is wrong to say it is not about what happened 30 years ago. This case is precisely about that. About how the decisions we make have ripples that extend through time, affecting lives in ways we never imagined. He walked to the center of the room. Helen Morales was 30 years old when she was fired. She was 6 months pregnant. She had no savings, no family. She had no safety net whatsoever. And the woman she had worked for faithfully for 5 years threw her out without references, without compensation, without even a word of encouragement. His voice rose slightly. What happened next? Helen had to give birth in a homeless shelter. She had to beg for food. She had to take jobs that paid $3 an hour, with no benefits, no protection. For 30 years, Helen Morales struggled and suffered while Karen lived in comfort, without thinking of her once. He turned to the jury. Teresa grew up seeing this. She grew up seeing her mother cry. She grew up hungry. She grew up in shelters, in roach-infested apartments, in dangerous neighborhoods. And all that time, she knew there was a woman who could have changed everything with a simple letter of recommendation, with a bit of basic human compassion. Henry pointed to the documents on his table. The prosecutor says Teresa planned this for 2 years. I tell you that Teresa lived with this pain for 30 years. Every day of her life was marked by the injustice done to her mother. It's not that she suddenly decided to take revenge, it's that she finally had the resources and opportunity to do something about the rage she had been carrying since she was a child. He paused, letting his words sink in. Now, I'm not saying what Teresa did was right. She clearly violated the law. But I ask you to consider the full context, to consider the extreme provocation, to consider the emotional state of someone who never had the chance to process her trauma in a healthy way because she was too busy surviving. He walked slowly back to his table. The prosecutor talks about the cycle of violence. But that cycle began 30 years ago, when Karen chose her own comfort over Helen's survival. Teresa didn't start this cycle. She responded to it. And yes, her response was illegal, but it was human, all too human. He turned to look directly at the jury. I ask you to find Teresa Morales guilty of the lesser charge, not of premeditated attempted murder, but of aggravated assault under extreme provocation. She deserves consequences, yes, but she also deserves compassion. Because at the end of the day, Teresa is another victim of the injustice that began 30 years ago. He sat down. The judge called a 20-minute recess before the jury began their deliberations. I stumbled out of the courtroom. Robert held my arm, guiding me toward a bench in the hallway. I sat down heavily, my head spinning. Are you okay, Mum? He asked with a worried voice. I don't know, I admitted. They were both right. The prosecutor and the defense lawyer. They were both right about different things. Robert sat next to me. What do you want to happen? What verdict are you hoping for? It was an impossible question. I want Teresa to be held responsible, but I also want her story to be heard. I want people to understand that this didn't start with a poisoned dress. It started with my silence 30 years ago. Then you've already accomplished that, Robert said softly. Everyone knows now. Your testimony, your honesty, ensured that. Before I could answer, I saw someone approaching down the hallway. It was Teresa. She was handcuffed, with an officer on each side, but she stopped when she saw me. The officers allowed her to stay there for a moment. We looked at each other across the distance. There was so much I wanted to say, that I was sorry, that I understood, that I wished I could go back and change everything. But the words caught in my throat. It was Teresa who spoke first. Thank you for telling the truth. I nodded, unable to speak. She looked at Robert. And I'm sorry for using you. You were kind to me and I took advantage of that. You didn't deserve to be a part of this. Robert stood up. You didn't deserve to grow up the way you did either. None of this is fair to anyone. Teresa smiled sadly. No, I guess not. The officers nudged her gently. I have to go, but I want you to know something. My mother, before she died, told me to let go of the resentment. She told me the rage would consume me. She was right, and now I'm going to pay the price for not listening to her. I watched her walk away, her footsteps echoing down the marble hallway. I wondered what would have happened if things had been different. If I had had courage 30 years ago. If Helen had had support. If Teresa had had therapy instead of just rage. The jury deliberations lasted 6 hours. When they finally called us back to the courtroom, my heart was pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it. The jury filed in, with carefully neutral expressions. The judge cleared his throat. Has the jury reached a verdict? The jury foreperson, a woman in her 50s with glasses, stood up. Yes, Your Honor. What is your verdict? On the charge of premeditated attempted murder, We find the defendant not guilty. A murmur ran through the room. Teresa closed her eyes. Her lawyer squeezed her shoulder. On the charge of aggravated assault under extreme provocation, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of falsification of documents, we find the defendant guilty. The judge nodded. Very well. Sentencing will be determined at a separate hearing in 2 weeks. Until then, the defendant will remain in custody. He struck the gavel. It was over. But as I left the courthouse that night, I knew this was far from over. The verdict was only one part of the story. Now came the hardest part, figuring out how to live with everything I had learned. The 2 weeks before the sentencing hearing passed in a strange fog. The media was frantic with the case. Headlines ranged from vengeful heroine or criminal and the poisoned dress to a story of delayed justice. My face was in every paper. Teresa's photo, with her serene expression and dark eyes, had become iconic. I received hundreds of messages. Some called me brave for admitting my guilt. Others called me foolish for giving ammunition to the defense. Many called me worse things. Privileged, cruel, class killer. And they were right. Every word hurt, because every word was true. But I also received messages of a different kind. Women who had worked as housekeepers shared their own stories of abuse, unfair firings, mistreatment. Men and women who had grown up in poverty wrote to me about the weight of intergenerational rage. Some thanked me for my honesty. Others cursed me for not having it 30 years earlier. Robert stopped reading the comments after the first week. "It's not healthy, Mum," he told me. "They're destroying you for something that happened decades ago." "No," I replied. "They are holding me accountable. There is a difference." He didn't understand. Not completely, but I didn't expect him to. Robert had grown up with privileges I had given him, in a world I had built on the backs of people like Helen. It wasn't his fault. But I also couldn't expect him to see things the way I now saw them. One night, 5 days before the sentencing hearing, I received an unexpected call. The number was unlisted. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up the phone. "Miss Parker?" The voice was shaky, old. "Yes, who is this?" "It's Martha, the woman from the cemetery, the one who testified at the trial." My heart raced. "Martha, how did you get my number?" "It doesn't matter. I need to see you. There's something you have to know before the sentencing. Something about Helen that Teresa doesn't know." "What thing?" "I can't say it over the phone. Please, can you meet me tomorrow? At the cemetery next to Helen's grave. At noon." Something in her voice told me this was important. "I'll be there." The next day I took a taxi to the municipal cemetery. The sky was cloudy, threatening rain again. I found Martha sitting on a bench near Helen's grave with a manila envelope on her lap. "Thank you for coming," she said when I sat down next to her. She looked more fragile than the last time I had seen her, as if the weight of what she was carrying was consuming her. "You said there's something I need to know." Martha nodded slowly. "After the trial, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Helen, about Teresa, about this whole mess. And I realized there was something I had never told Teresa, something Helen made me promise to keep a secret." She handed me the envelope. "Helen wrote this 3 days before she died. She gave it to me and made me swear to only open it if Teresa ever tried to take revenge on you. I thought she was being paranoid, that Teresa would never do such a thing, but Helen knew her daughter better than I thought." I opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside were several handwritten pages in a shaky but legible script. It was a letter. It began, "To Teresa, My beloved daughter. I read in silence, tears rolling down my cheeks as the words were revealed. My dear Teresa, if you are reading this, it means you have done something I fear. It means you let the rage consume you in a way I never wanted. And you need to know the complete truth about what happened so many years ago. It is true that Karen fired me when I was pregnant with you. It is true that it was cruel and unfair. But there is something else I never told you because I was ashamed. It wasn't just Karen who made that decision. I also played a part. You see, I was having an affair with her husband, the man of the house. It lasted 6 months. I knew it was wrong. I knew I was betraying Karen, betraying myself. But he was persuasive, and I was lonely and stupid. When I became pregnant, I wasn't sure if the baby was his or another man I had been seeing. He panicked. He told Karen that I had to leave, that a pregnant employee would be inappropriate. And Karen, without knowing the complete truth, agreed. She didn't know about the affair. She never knew. Does this mean that what she did was right? No. She should have fought for me. She should have questioned her husband. But I also betrayed her, Teresa, and I have carried that guilt all these years. I told you a simplified version of the story because I didn't want you to think badly of me. I told you I was fired without reason because it was easier than admitting my own role in my downfall. But if you are ever considering harming Karen in my name, you need to know this. She is not the only villain in this story. None of us are. Life is not as simple as victims and perpetrators. We are all complicated. We all make mistakes. And living with rage, living for revenge, will only destroy you as it almost destroyed me. Please, my daughter, let this go. Live your life, be better than I was. That is the only real revenge, to be happy in spite of everything. I love you always, Mum. I finished reading, my face soaked with tears. I looked at Martha, who was crying silently next to me. Helen told me about the affair just before she died, Martha said hoarsely. She was tormented by it. She felt she had ruined her own life with that decision, and she was afraid that Teresa would discover the truth and hate her. Teresa knows nothing of this. Nothing. Helen died taking that secret with her. But now? Martha looked at me with pleading eyes. What do we do with this information? I remained silent for a long time, looking at Helen's grave. The woman who had been more complicated than anyone had imagined. The woman who, like all of us, had been simultaneously a victim and an agent of her own destiny. I have to give it to Teresa, I finally said. Before the sentencing. She deserves to know the truth about her mother. What if that destroys her? What if it makes all her suffering, all her plan, seem based on a lie? Then she'll have to deal with it, just as I had to deal with the truth about myself. We all deserve to know the whole story, no matter how much it hurts. Martha nodded slowly. How will you give it to her? I'll talk to her lawyer. I'll request a meeting before the sentencing hearing. Kindness and patience are never wasted, even when directed at those who have hurt us. True strength lies not in seeking retribution, but in offering understanding and the opportunity for closure. This approach can stop cycles of pain and allow for genuine emotional progress. 2 days later, I was in a sterile conference room at the county jail. Teresa was sitting across from me, with Henry, her lawyer, at her side. She looked at me with a mixture of confusion and caution. Why did you ask to see me? She asked. I slid the letter across the table. Your mother wrote this before she died. Martha gave it to me. I think you need to read it. Teresa took the letter with hands that trembled slightly. I watched her face as she read, seeing it move from confusion to disbelief, then to pure pain. No, she whispered when she finished. This can't be real. It is. Martha confirmed it. Your mother told her before she died. Teresa dropped the letter onto the table as if it burned. My mother had an affair with your husband. All this time, I thought you were the devil incarnate. I thought you had ruined her life out of pure cruelty. But she also played a role in this. Yes, I said softly. But that doesn't absolve me. Your mother made a mistake. Yes, but I still had the choice to show compassion, and I didn't. Both things can be true at the same time. Teresa closed her eyes. Tears rolled down her cheeks. I spent my whole life hating you, planning this, sacrificing everything to avenge a woman who wasn't who I thought she was. Your mother was human, I replied. She made mistakes, but she also loved you, and she clearly regretted what she did. She wanted you to be free, Teresa. She didn't want you to carry her pain. But I did, and now I'm going to prison for it. Henry intervened. We can use this in the sentencing hearing. We can argue that your revenge was based on incomplete information, that your mother would not have wanted this. Teresa shook her head slowly. No, I won't destroy my mother's memory to reduce my sentence. She suffered enough already. I won't expose her secrets to the whole world. Teresa, Henry said urgently, this could be the difference between 5 years and 15. I don't care. Her voice was firm now. My mother gave me this letter as a warning, not as an excuse. She wanted me to know that revenge was wrong, and she was right. The sentencing hearing took place in a smaller but equally crowded courtroom. The verdict had been issued, but now the judge had to decide how many years of her life Teresa would spend behind bars. It could be as few as 5 or as many as 20, depending on the factors he considered. I sat in the front row, directly behind the prosecutor's table. Robert was next to me, his hand over mine. I could feel his tension, his need for this to be over once and for all. But I knew that no matter what happened today, it would never truly end. This would follow all of us forever. The judge, a man in his 60s with completely white hair and a severe expression, entered, and we all stood up. When we sat down again, the silence was so dense I could hear my own breathing. We have heard extensive testimony during this trial, the judge began in a grave voice. This is one of the most complex cases I have presided over in my 30 years on the bench. Not because the facts are complicated, but because the moral circumstances are. He looked directly at Teresa. Ms. Morales, you committed a serious crime. You deliberately planned to poison another person. You used deception, manipulation, and meticulous preparation that lasted years. These actions deserve significant consequences. Teresa held her head high, not looking away. However, the judge continued, I must also consider the context. The extreme provocation you suffered throughout your life. The injustice your mother experienced. The complete lack of support or resources to process that trauma in a healthy way. He leaned back in his chair. I have read every testimony. I have reviewed every piece of evidence. And I have come to a conclusion that I know will not completely satisfy anyone, but which I believe is fair within the limits of the law. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would jump out of my chest. Teresa Morales, for the charges of aggravated assault under extreme provocation, fraud, and falsification of documents, I sentence you to 8 years in state prison, with the possibility of parole after 5 years for good behavior. A murmur ran through the room. It wasn't the maximum, but it wasn't the minimum either. Teresa briefly closed her eyes, then nodded, accepting her fate. In addition, the judge continued, I order that during your incarceration, you receive intensive psychological therapy to process the trauma of your childhood. And when you are released, you will complete 500 hours of community service working with women in similar situations to those your mother faced. He turned to me. Ms. Parker, although you were the victim of Miss Morales's crime, your own testimony revealed a prior injustice that contributed directly to these events. I cannot punish you legally for decisions made 30 years ago, but I can and must publicly acknowledge the role you played in creating the conditions for this tragedy. I nodded, feeling the weight of his words. I understand, Your Honor. Therefore, I order that you establish a compensation fund of $100,000 for organizations that support domestic workers and vulnerable employees. This is not a legal fine, but a strong recommendation that I expect you to fulfill. I will do so, I said firmly. Gladly. The judge struck his gavel. Let this be a lesson to all of us. Actions have consequences. Indifference has a cost, and justice, true justice, requires us all to take responsibility for our role in the suffering of others. He struck the gavel once more. Court is adjourned. Officers approached Teresa to escort her, but before they took her away, she turned toward me. Our eyes met across the courtroom. There was no hatred in her eyes now, only weariness, a deep resignation. I stood up and walked toward her. The officers tensed, but did not stop me. I stood in front of Teresa, this woman who had tried to kill me, who had poisoned my dress, who had manipulated my son. I'm sorry, I said simply. For your mother, for you, for everything. Teresa blinked, as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. I'm sorry too, for using you for my revenge, for not listening to my mother when she warned me to let go of the resentment. What will you do when you get out? She smiled sadly. I guess I'll have 5 years to think about it. But I think my mother was right. The best revenge is to be happy in spite of everything. Maybe I'll finally try that. The officers led her away. I watched her leave, knowing I would probably never see her again. 5 years, maybe 8, and then she would be free to build a life her mother would have wanted for her. Robert hugged me as we left the courthouse. It's over, Mom. It's finally over. But I knew it wasn't true. This would never truly end. I would live with the scars on my skin. Robert would live with the knowledge that he was used as a weapon, and Teresa would live with years of her life lost to a revenge her mother never wanted. 3 months later, I established the fund the judge had recommended. But I didn't stop at $100,000. I put in $500,000. I called it the Helen Morales Fund for Domestic Workers. It would help women facing unfair firings, provide legal resources, and offer job training and emergency financial support. I also visited the municipal cemetery once more. This time, I hired a stonemason to create a proper headstone for Helen. Not just a metal plaque. A beautiful granite stone with her name, her dates, and an inscription. Beloved mother, her struggle will not be forgotten. Martha was there when they installed the headstone. We cried together over the grave of a woman neither of us had known well enough, but who had changed us all. Do you think she would forgive us? I asked. Martha smiled through her tears. I think Helen would understand. She knew better than anyone that we are all human. We all fail. We all cause harm. But we all also have the capacity to try to do better. Robert changed too. He left his old job and began working with non-profit organizations that supported low-income families. He told me he couldn't keep living in the privileged world without at least trying to give back. He couldn't undo the past, but he could try to create a different future. As for me, I wrote a book. Not for money or fame, but because I needed to document this complete story. I needed people to understand that evil doesn't always come with horns and a tail. Sometimes it comes as indifference, as silence, as the decision not to question, not to fight, not to care about someone whose life doesn't intersect directly with yours. I titled the book The Dress. I donated all the profits to the Helen Morales Fund. 5 years after the sentencing, I received a letter. It was from Teresa, writing from prison. Her handwriting was cleaner now, more controlled. "Dear Karen," it began, "I will soon be eligible for parole. My lawyer believes I have a good chance thanks to my participation in therapy and education programs here. I've been thinking a lot about what I'll do when I get out. I've decided to finish my education. I want to become a social worker. I want to help children who grew up like me, who carry rage they don't know how to process. I want to break the cycle that almost destroyed me. I also want you to know that I've been in intensive therapy, as the judge ordered. I've worked through much of the resentment I carried. I've come to understand that my mother was more complicated than I believed, and that you are too. We all are. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I don't think either of us needs that from the other, but I want you to know that I no longer hate you. I understand now that hatred only hurt myself. When I get out, I'd like to visit you, not to reopen wounds, but to close this chapter properly, so that both of us can finally move on. Would you be willing? With respect, Teresa. I read the letter 3 times. Then I took paper and a pen and began to write my answer. Dear Teresa, I would be honored to see you when you get out. Come to my house, we'll have coffee, and maybe, together, we can find something that looks like peace. Your mother was right about many things. Rage consumes, revenge destroys, but she was also right about something else. We all deserve the chance to be happy in spite of our pain. I look forward to it. Karen. I put the letter in the mail and walked back to my house. The scars on my skin had faded over time, but they were still there if you knew where to look. Silver lines that told a story of poison and consequences, of guilt and irresponsibility. I looked at the dress hanging in my closet, the one the police had finally returned to me after the case was closed. I had kept it, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that our choices matter, that indifference kills, that silence has a price, and a reminder that even from the ashes of poison, something new can grow. Not redemption exactly, not complete forgiveness, but maybe something better. Understanding, accountability, and the willingness to do better, day after day, for the rest of our lives. I closed the closet door and looked out the window. The sun was rising, painting the sky pink and gold. A new day, a new chance to choose compassion over indifference, to choose action over silence. The dress had been my awakening. Painful, terrible, but necessary. And now, finally, I was awake. This story is a stark reminder that the deepest wounds we inflict are often not through malice, but through the casual cruelty of indifference. It teaches us that privilege comes with an invisible, profound responsibility to acknowledge the humanity and struggles of everyone, especially those whose lives intersect with ours through service. The cycle of pain and vengeance, which consumed decades of 2 families' lives, began not with Teresa's poisoned dress, but with Karen's silent choice to prioritize convenience over basic human decency 30 years prior. True justice and healing are only found when we face the complete truth, accept our own role in past harms, and actively commit to breaking those destructive cycles. The goal is not simple forgiveness, but lasting accountability, understanding, and the courageous effort to build a better future, one compassionate choice at a time.